Hello, my name is Anne-Marie Cannon, and I'm the host of Armchair Historians. What's your favorite history? Each episode begins with this one question. Our guests come from all walks of life. YouTube celebrities, comedians, historians, even neighbors from the small mountain community that I live in. They're people who love history and get really excited about a particular time, place, or person from our distant or not so distant past. The jumping off point is the place where they became curious, then entered the rabbit hole into discovery. Fueled by an unrelenting need to know more, we look at history through the filter of other people's eyes. Armchair Historians is a Belgian Rabbit production. Stay up to date with us through Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram. Wherever you listen to your podcast, that is where you'll find us. Armchair Historians is an independent, commercial-free podcast. If you'd like to support the show and keep it ad-free, you can buy us a cup of coffee through Ko-fi, or you can become a patron through Patreon. Links to both in the episode notes. In this episode of Armchair Historians, I have a lively chat with comedian, actor, and TED Talk presenter Erik Escobar. We compare notes on the 1980s, me having lived it from the inside, and he having admired the decade from the outside. Can a millennial teach a baby boomer something new about the decade of decadence? Listen on to find out. Erik has appeared on Fox's I Can See Your Voice, BuzzFeed, NBC's Last Comic Standing, Season 7, and the feature VHS alongside Tim Robbins and Thomas Lennon. As a stand-up comedian, he has performed throughout the United States. You can find Erik's TED Talk, Creating a More Fulfilling Lifestyle Through Humor, on the TED Talk YouTube channel.
It's a big countdown. I like it.
It's very formal. Erik Escobar, thank you for being here today.
Anne-Marie, thank you for having me. I'm super excited. I love history. I love podcasts. Boom, put them together. It's going to be a great time.
I think so, and I have no idea what you're going to talk about. Sometimes I know ahead of time, sometimes I don't, so I kind of like it when I don't. And
me too. I like it when I get to surprise you.
Awesome. So I'm just going to ask the question, what's your favorite history that we're going to be talking about today?
You know what? I definitely had a lot kind of like circling around my head. I'm a big fan of just the majesty and the mystery around like Egyptian history, so I was thinking about that. I was thinking about the Renaissance, but I think I'm going to mix it up. I think the point in history that we're going to go with right now are the 80s. I would love to talk about the 80s.
I did not see that coming. And it's funny because I was looking at my outfit today and I thought this kind of is 80s. It got a
good 80s vibe. I like it.
Yeah, sometimes I really get dressed up for my interviews if somebody's talking about like the Victorian era. So I did not see that coming. Renaissance and Egyptian, are you bringing those into this history?
I think growing up as a kid, I hated school. School was always like, oh, this is so hard to remember these things, blah, blah. But Egyptian history, I always thought was fascinating. And I think it was because when I was a kid, the King Tut exhibit came into town and I saw that tangibleness. And I was like, that's so cool. Yeah. As an artist, the Renaissance is super cool. But as someone who was born in 1990 and who constantly hears about how great the 80s were and about how fun the 80s were, and as a comedian who wished they could have experienced the comedy boom in the 80s, I was like, yo, Anne-Marie gets people all the time talking about ancient history. Let's go a little more modern. Let's go a little crazier. Let's go 1980 to 89.
Okay, I'm in, and actually I lived it, so.
But you're only 21. How does that work out? I don't understand.
It was another life. It was really another life.
Gotcha.
So, okay, have at it. Tell us about the 80s, and I'll probably chime in with my own experiences if that's okay.
I would love that. The 80s, I think, were so cool. I kind of talked about it earlier, but as a stand-up comic, as someone who travels the road all the time, it's a tough gig. You know what I mean? Like, people don't pay as much as they should. It's hard to put together runs, but you hear all these stories about comics who experienced comedy in the 80s during the boom when cable TV hit Everyone was watching their favorite stand-ups on TV. They would go to their local clubs. Every city had a major comedy club. You would go in. It was a giant party. There wasn't COVID. You could hug people. It was a beautiful time. An absolutely beautiful time. And I'm a big believer that, whatever period you look at, the art is a true reflection of whatever was going on at that time. And let's look at like music in the 80s. New wave was new and poppy and fun and exciting. And then you just look at like the way these musicians and these artists performed. Remember like the crazy haircuts? Just look at hair metal. Who would wear that today? No one. But that's so cool. But they wore that in the 1980s. And I think the pop of it and the allure of it and the bigness of the 80s, the colors, the excitement, the party atmosphere, that's something I wish I could have experienced. And I think it's just so cool. So cool. So that's my historical period of the day.
So I lived it from the inside, and
beautiful.
I went to cosmetology school in high school. I graduated in 1981. And so I was doing that here. That's what I did. And everything was very garish and big hair, product, teasing and all that stuff. It was all very decadent and kind of in your face. But a little backstory about me is that, and so in 1985, I had my daughter, and I did not experience a lot of the crazy. I watched it from TV maybe, but I didn't like live that. Like I had already sowed my wild oats maybe a little bit in the 70s, but I love this, that I'm seeing it from the inside, but you're kind of looking back and seeing it from the outside. What's the biggest thing that you would have loved to experience in the 1980s?
Oh, geez Louise. I think, can I pick two?
Sure, you could pick as many as you want.
Awesome. This is going to be a 3-hour long podcast. Here's my top 50. Here we go. Top 60. Why not? I think I'll just kind of like throw out a couple things. I think, like I said, it would have been great to go on tour in the 80s as a comic.
Yeah.
Two, I think that as someone who was in bands when I was a little younger, and I did, get to perform on the Sunset Strip, it was cool, going to the Roxy, going to the Whiskey. It used to be the Key Club. I don't know what it's called now, but it's cool to be able to have seen that, in the 2000s and such. And it was awesome, but you look at it and you're like, this used to be so much more. You know what I mean? This used to be bigger. Like, yeah, you got a couple people walking down the sidewalk. I remember seeing pictures where people were just crowded on those sidewalks going from club to club. I think something like that would have been awesome to experience. And I also feel now, as someone who is a big movie buff, I love film, I love television. Whenever I get the honor of, being booked on something as an actor or even working production, you see how things are so streamlined, and you see how things are so, let's just do it. We know what we're doing. Here's the green screen, here's a prop. In the 80s, I think we were still kind of figuring out the magic of, big productions and big movies. And there weren't green screens. Like, I can't tell you how many sets I'm on now. I'm like, oh, okay, there's a green screen. Oh, they're just going to put it in post. But I love like big props. You know what I mean? When I love theme parks, and I love seeing, the big King Kong or, the big dinosaurs on Jurassic Park. And to think like, wow, they used to make like big time set pieces. They would make a whole dinosaur just for 2 shots. They wouldn't just put it in their computer. I would have loved to see kind of like the movie magic back then, because it was so different than what we have today.
Yeah, that's interesting. In that continuum, my grandfather was he used to make films in the 1930s. Mm-hmm. He was a photographer or whatever, but I never thought of the 80s as being part of that continuum, because he did it like he spliced things and cut them together, and there was no sound, so they were all silent. And he put, but there's that, it is part of that continuum, the 80s, and I would have never thought of that. Interesting.
Well, as someone who, my biggest, most favorite movie growing up was Back to the Future. And I don't know if it was Back to the Future because I liked it, or Back to the Future because they were the only VHSs we owned. But either way, I love Back to the Future. And you watch it now, especially Back to the Future 2, when they're in Times Square and they have all these futuristic cars and everything's all different. And you're like, they took a whole block by block, and they turned it into a major set where now that would just be, someone behind a Mac just like putting in all the little details. And I'm like, wow, that's so cool.
Right. That is a classic, though. Back to the Future. It's a classic.
Amen to that.
Okay. One of the questions I always ask is, where do we see this? And I know it's a wide open question, and you can just pick something. Where do we see this in pop culture? Of course, there's the pop culture of the 80s. There's the pop culture of today, which I just watched The Night Stalker. And that was just a mashup of that time period. I mean, there's all different ways to think about pop culture in the 80s.
I think it's all over. You really start, when I think of the 70s, I almost think of like earthy tones, kind of like mild tones, very organic, very, very beautiful. Then, from 79 to 80, it's like bright pink, bright blue, bright green. Everything is very big. And there's something, you see that the 90s had grunge, but you see that kind of continue in the 90s, 2000s, 2010s. Like, there's something really exciting about that big pop art. And I feel like that big pop art really came through from the 80s. There were obviously, little schmidgens here and there before that. But that's when it really popped out. And in pop culture alone, I look at music nowadays, and we almost don't have the idea of a rock star anymore, or of a band performing on stage, and it's just, guitar, bass, drums, singer. There's a lot of electric components and a lot of pre-produced components to a lot of our pop music nowadays. And that all started with like new wave and that synth and that, you know what I mean? That was like the 80s, and it's, in its birth, it was very electric-y type music, which is everything we have today in pop culture.
Wow. You're giving me a fresh look at the 80s. And the 80s was definitely, the 70s and the 80s, I thought, I never want to revisit them fashion-wise. I see it creeping into my wardrobe. I have a lot of vintage pieces. I'm finding a new appreciation of it, I think. And of course, all fashion decades or whatever, they come back into fashion. And even the 80s was a mashup of 1940s, and there were all these different influences on it. So, yeah, I have a new appreciation for the 80s. Thank you, Erik.
Thank you for having me on so we can talk about the 80s.
Favorite music, 1980s?
Ooh, it's great question. All the hits, you know what I mean? All the things that are classics because they're classics and people still listen to them, like Aha. And it's weird because I feel like the 80s were also a very singles kind of age. You know what I mean? Now you like bands, you like musical artists. I love the song Take On Me. I don't know if I've heard another Aha song. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
I love White Wedding. I could probably name a couple other Billy Idol songs, but ultimately I'm kind of like, wait, he maybe did Dancing With Myself, something else. Those big pop hits are the ones that you remember. I'm a big kind of like weird music guy. So, a lot of like your weird 80s songs that had, some funk to them, talking about like Flock of Seagulls, and also metal. I think metal was so big in the 80s, so it's really popped. Your Metallicas, your death metal started to become big. Your hair metal, look at that. Like your Motley Crue's and all them, they all kind of were coming up around this time. And it was wild because it was also a time when music videos were big. Think of some music videos from the 70s, maybe 60s, but you look in the 80s and MTV totally changed the game. So seeing all these like hair metal music videos as a kid, I remember being like, that was extreme. This is so cool. They're wild. They're breaking stuff. They're wearing makeup. They have crazy hair. Anything in that hair metal scene or new wave scene, I'm all about.
Yeah, videos. Because when everyone you just said, Flock of Seagulls, Take On Me, is that the name of the song?
Take On Me by Aha. I remember I listened to that every day for a while.
I didn't even know it was Aha. I heard the words going, the song going through my head. And that was the one with the cartoon, right? The video was the one with the cartoon.
They were like going into like a sketch drawing.
Yes.
And they were like going back and forth. And you didn't see stuff like that, from the Beatles.
Because everything you just said was like a visual MTV experience for me. Wow. Okay, cool. I was not into the metal, not at all. My boyfriend is really still into metal, and he's always telling Alexa to play metal music, and I'm like, Alexa, don't listen to him. But sometimes I give it to him. I don't know, it disturbs me.
I feel like it's one of those things where if you're into it, you're all in. But if you're not into it, then you kind of just like look at it on the side. Like I have like my girlfriend's cousin, he wears Van Halen shirts every day. You know what I mean? He's always listening to records. He has AC/DC clothing. Like everything he wears is like 80s metal. And I feel like when you're an 80s metal fan or a metal fan, you go all in. You know, very few people are like 1 foot, one out. It's like, this is my life. Let's go.
Yeah, that's his go-to music. And I don't understand that it helps him to settle down.
I don't get it either, but you know what? Respect. If it's your thing, have fun, listen to some AC/DC all day and calm down.
That's it. And he's good because he'll go to concerts with me that I like, and I would never go to a metal concert, but he doesn't go to concerts, so thank you. But yeah, so music, wow, that's another one. Movie. Favorite movie. Is it Back to the Future?
It's got to be the Back to the Future trilogy. And I'm going to go, it's not just Back to the Future, it's Back to the Future 2, okay. Back to the Future 1, Back to the Future 3. There's my order of favorite 80s films.
Is there a reason for that?
I just thought that like in Back to the Future 1, they had a great story. It was really, really cool the way they like put it together. You know, it's Zemeckis behind it, you had Spielberg behind it. And I think they went out, they made a movie. And when Back to the Future 1 got big, I feel like the budget for Back to the Future 2 and Back to the Future 3 were so much bigger because they're like, we kind of hit gold on this. This is a really cool thing. So I feel like you watch Back to the Future 2 and aesthetically, it's so cool. They're in the future. Anytime something's in the future, I'm like, wow, this is what's it going to look like. And it was just visually, I think it's the best of the three. I think it's so cool.
So one of the things that we did this summer with COVID is I live in this really great small mountain community in the Rocky Mountains. It's an old historic town, and I have friends. You know, we had our little pod of friends, I'll say, and my friends, the Mays, they set up a outdoor drive-in sit-down thing in their yard, and cool. We watched old movies. Like the first one was Jaws. And then we watched, you know, some of the movies from the 80s, and it was so interesting going back and looking at them and how politically incorrect they were and the way that we thought. And, you know, we're really trying to change up the way that we talk, the way that we think about race and ethnicity and, you know, the sexes. And it was such an eye-opener to go back and look and see all those little things in the movies that today would never work, ever.
Yeah, and it's weird because it was not too long ago.
Urban Cowboy, that was one. Oh my God, Urban Cowboy. Whew!
I feel you. I totally understand because there are things that we could not get away with in film or TV nowadays.
So how do you look at you from your, you know, generation looking back and you watch these things? Do you see those blatant like things represented in those movies? And what do you think when you see them?
I do. I think as someone who's a millennial, whether that's fortunately or unfortunately, I'm a little more sensitive to, oh, wow, I can't believe they said that. Or, oh, wow, they're treating this person like this. Or, wow, they're only casting Asian people or Black people like this. You see it. As a comic, I'm very like, you can create jokes about whatever. You know what I mean? You can create entertainment about whatever. I think as soon as we start limiting our mind, you know what I mean? Oh, I can't think that way. I can't see things this way. I think when we limit ourselves, it limits the art. And I don't say that to say, you know, like, oh, it's okay if things are racist, or okay if things are sexist. No, I don't think that's great. But if in comedy, the joke is either parodying it or the punchline is funnier than the actual offense level, go for it. And in entertainment, it's kind of the same way. I feel like if you use this as a tool to show like how messed up things were back then, or if you use this as a tool to show like, we're not going to censor what it was like back then, this is how it was. I think it's not horrible because, you know, you're not doing it to be mean. The intention of racism or sexism isn't there. You know, you're using it to, if anything, fight racism and sexism or whatever it might be, anyism. But two, I think it's kind of interesting because, you know, we can't always believe things were always great. You know what I mean?
Right. And
when we look at these snapshots through film or TV of like, oh, Archie Bunker sure is not saying good things. It kind of shows us like how far we've come and how far we have to go. which is, it's a beneficial thing, like it used to be this bad back then or this weird back then. Let's change it. We have changed and we can do better in the future.
I kind of think the depiction of Archie Bunker was before its time because it was such a parody of that kind of racism. And, I kind of grew up in that house, not that house, but, my father was extremely conservative and that type of thing. So, Archie Bunker, I don't think they could do that today, but
never.
In hindsight, it was brilliant. And the point of it was to basically show you this is what it looks like when you're a racist and when you're all these things. That is an interesting segue into potentially another conversation about the 80s. Because as you were talking, I was like, wow, it sounds like everything was great in the 80s. And I'm not so sure that it was. And so are there things that come to mind in the 80s that were, the darker part of the 80s that you stop
totally.
And think of?
Nowadays, since we have social media and, we kind of have this presence we put out there for ourselves, we really want to be the best people that we can be. So, because, there's eyes on us everywhere. You know what I mean? Wherever we go, there's like eyes on us. In the 80s, it kind of felt like there was this like, no one knows what anyone is doing. So let's just do all this crazy stuff. It was like, I don't know how healthy or good that is. That's probably not the best idea to do that. There was a lot less, accountability. You know what I mean? When I go on tour, I like make my bed before I leave a hotel room. The 80s was known for like, let's trash it. And that's okay. We'll encourage it. And also the depiction of, women back then was so not great. You know what I mean? It was very objectifying. That's one thing where I was like, this is definitely something where I'm glad that's not still a thing. And I'm glad we kind of come out of it. There's so many things about that time period that I feel were so gritty and not good and not great, but also that was kind of the reason why the 80s has this weird mystique about it. You know what I mean? Because it was the wild, wild west. It was a free for all. People were doing whatever they wanted to do. Everyone was on drugs all the time. Like it was a wild time.
It created Donald Trump.
Yes, 100%, which I am not all for, said mildly.
Oh no, I'm just breathing easier every day myself. And also, the likes of Jeffrey Epstein, and you talk about women and sexism. I just watched this really good show on Amazon. It's called What the Constitution Means to Me. Have you seen that?
I have not.
Oh my God. Well, it really, it's this woman who, when she was 15, she used to go around and do these debates about what the Constitution means to me. And they were contests, and she won all the time. She won so much that she ended up saving enough money to go to college. Whoa. And she goes back. It's a one-woman show. I recommend it. If there's a woman in your life, I recommend it. And so, check that out. But what you're saying, it's kind of like, we're just kind of coming out of the dark ages, and that, the way that women have been treated throughout history is mind-blowing. And we're still there. We're still in it, just like with
we have a long way to go.
Racism and all that stuff. But there was just something about that really made me see what we might have thought was subtle. Like, as we get further away from it, it's not subtle. It's blatant. It has primed women to be subservient and to be afraid.
Yeah, when we look at the 80s, we kind of pick and choose our favorite parts, and we pick and choose our favorite things. A lot of bad things went down. You know what I mean? The way certain minorities were treated, the way women were treated, not great. Not a fan. And I think there's something really kind of exciting about the time we're living in now, because there's a lot more social responsibility. So in the 80s, I think it's so weird because, we kind of pick and choose our favorite things about it. We love MTV. We love the music. We love this. But really it was, a very dark time, and a lot of bad stuff was kind of going on. So, you kind of look at it through like those rose-colored glasses, like these were the good things, but we can't forget about all this. And I think now we live in a really cool time because of social media and the internet. Like, even if you grew up in a place and you only have a mentality of, this thing and this thing and this thing, you can go online and see different perspectives, which I think is really exciting. Really judge for yourself, like, oh, women shouldn't be treated that way. Minorities shouldn't be treated this way. And it's kind of cool because we're in a time now where they don't have an excuse to be socially irresponsible.
Right.
So at least we're living in better times. There's great parts about it. There's worse parts about it, but that's definitely a big win for everyone in these modern times of social media.
Yes, I agree. I agree with that. And I'm hopeful about that too. For me, I am a child of the 70s, and I have had to be really challenged the past few years with my internal systemic, racism and all that kind of thing. And it's uncomfortable, but I think that, getting to that point, it's making me a better person. It's making me look inside of what my norms are and why are they norms, and how do I feed into the bigger problems of social justice. And so I agree. I think it's a great thing. And, reflecting back is helpful too, looking back on that time period and seeing it, how it was. And I agree. It's like Archie Bunker. He was somebody's dad. He was a racist, whatever, but he was somebody's dad. And, I don't know. It's a big mishmash of things that
It is.
where we, are dealing with today. But I'm hopeful. And it's the age of Aquarius. They say, that's like it's a new dawning, and if you believe in that stuff.
I do believe in the good energies. I believe whatever good energy you put out is what you're going to receive. And every person's a person. Every human's a human. Everyone deserves to be treated with respect, just like another person. And I think it's exciting because, there's a lot more open-mindedness going on, where before it was like, I believe what I believe. If you go against me, screw you, or I'm going to double down on my beliefs. But a lot more people are being open-minded, being like, oh, well, maybe the things that I believe, the things that I grew up with in my experiences, they formed who I am, but that isn't necessarily the person that I have to be. You know what I mean? I could change that if I see it in perspective. And at the end of the day, when you put out that good energy and when you try to make everyone just have a better day and happier, that's something that, we should be working towards. And when you see that in someone else, it kind of inspires you to be that way. And I think slowly but surely, all that goodness is kind of, taken over, which is great.
I like that. And it reminds me of your TED Talk. Maybe we'll talk about that. I think the hardest thing for me, though, has been, my boyfriend calls it the baby boomers' last hurrah with this guy that just left our house, the White House. And, there is an unmoving, unwilling to change element. And I'm hoping that by focusing on, somebody once told me that when you focus on the problem gets bigger, but when you focus on the solution, then you have a solution. And so I think what you're saying, it is very simple, and it's something that I have always felt and believed as well. It's like what energy you put out multiplies. But I'll tell you, I have put in such negative energy into the universe the past 4 years. It's
Me
like
too.
I'm having to reprogram, and I love that message that you have. Was there anything else about the 80s that you wanted to talk about before we move into what I feel is a natural segue into your TED Talk?
You know what? I think something super cool about the 80s as well is the idea of cable TV. Because now when you look at how artists and musicians, singers, whoever it is, promote themselves, it's all through the internet. You know what I mean? Viral YouTube videos, get big on TikTok, get big on Instagram. Everything's kind of in this virtual showcase of marketing. And I feel like that's kind of, the 80s is where it all started. Because with MTV and cable TV, that's when you could really market yourself and sell yourself and show what you got through a music video, through a stand-up special, through whatever it may be.
Yeah.
And before that in the 70s, people still promoted stuff. You still had radio, people would flyer things up, you would have events. But in terms of virtual electronic marketing, the 80s is where it started. And I think it's so crazy how we went from cable TV to TikTok videos. And it's all in the same through line of get your name out there with some type of content.
Wow. I'm just reflecting on my life and the progression of technology. I grew up in a house that started out with a black and white TV where my brother, there were six kids in my family. And I was the youngest, and my brother would be like, "Hey, Anne-Marie, go move the antenna. Oh, right there. And then don't move, just, and it's black and white. And then, just how technology has progressed, and that, these stopping points that I don't think of that you see very clearly. I love that.
I remember I'm probably in the last generation to know what it was like to not have a cell phone. Straight up. You know what I mean? When I was in 5th, 6th grade, you would go to the mall with your friends. You would be like, "Hey mom, hey dad, can you pick me up at 8?" Everyone gets picked up at 7 o'clock. And then you're stuck there for an hour. You know what I mean? You're not playing on your phone. You're not calling them for a ride. You're not like trying to look at your email. You're just stuck there without a phone for an hour. And you'd make it work. You would go into Spencer Gifts. You would grab some fries at Red Robin. You know what I mean? You just hung out at the mall. And kids nowadays, they don't see that. You know what I mean? If you don't have your phone, freak out. I freak out when I don't have my phone, and I'm 30.
Yeah. Well, I have really been aware how when I'm, stuck in line somewhere, or I have to wait for a long time, I love technology. I'm one of those people. I'm not one of those people who's like, technology. And I love it because I look around and I think people are more patient because they have something to do. I'm more patient because I have something to do. I love it. But yeah, you're right. That's so
It's a weird time.
How old are you, if you don't mind me asking?
I'm 30, about to turn 31 in a month, just about a month. Go Pisces.
Ooh, Pisces. That's a very complex zodiac sign. Ooh.
I'm a complex guy.
My list. I had to write
Do your thing, yeah. No worries.
A note here. It said, "Stick to the script," because I was just editing the podcast. It's going out today, and I went off on so many tangents. And so
I'm the same way. Sometimes that's where we find gold, so don't you worry.
You're right. I agree. Okay, so what one thing, before we go on to the TED Talk, what one thing do you want my listeners to remember about this history that we're talking about?
We were talking, we tangented, there you go, look, leads to gold. We tangented a little bit about how, sometimes there can be a lot of hate, sometimes there can be a lot of anger. And I feel like we kind of live in a world where a lot of people would rather be right than they would rather be good. You know what I mean? A lot of people would rather be correct and be like, "No, I'm right," than they would rather just be like a good person. And I think we look at the 80s and we look how fun it was and we look how crazy it was. And there was a lot of wild things happening. It was an exciting time, but there was also a lot of darkness there. And there was also a lot of inequality there. And coming to today, we kind of see how people would much rather sort of be good than, be right, or like have their own selfish reasons. And I think that's the thing that I always try to remind myself and take away. And especially with, the last 4 years of who's been in the White House, it's okay to not be right. It's okay to have an open mind. I would rather be a good person than, be right. And I feel like a lot of other people would rather be a good person than be right. And we can further this path and we can further this idea and further this mindset if we all just try to be good people and treat each other with respect and fight for what's right. If you believe something before, just have an open mind, because that could change.
You are a good man, Erik Escobar.
I'm trying.
That's all. It's practice. It's practice, not perfection. So, yeah, the 80s was probably the most selfish decade that I lived through. It was all about me. And today we have choices, and that is a great thing. One of the things that I saw out there on the internet about you was that you did a TED Talk.
Mm-hmm.
And
I did.
And how does that happen? How do you do a TED Talk? Do you apply to something, or how does that work?
So I was actually in grad school at the time, and I was really working a lot on techniques in humor and techniques that comics use that can lead to, sort of what we were talking earlier, a more open-minded lifestyle, a happier lifestyle, a more present lifestyle. And I think there were a lot of fun things I was playing with where I was like, oh, this could really turn into a great talk. So I started pitching myself to, little TED events all over the country. Eventually, Carroll College over in Helena, Montana, were like, "We would love to bring you in. It would be awesome." I came in, we prepped for months, and Anne-Marie, get this. I believe we had our TED Talk on the 13th or 14th of March, and the day before, lockdown hit all of Montana. So we went from, I think
Oh,
it was
that
like
explains everything.
explains a lot. Because we went from like a 200 person sold out crowd to like, no one can be in there. We're still going to film it, but it's only going to be for like a camera guy and the director. And it was so wild because I had this great idea leading up to it. Was like, I think it'd be a fun bit if I came out as my own warm up guy. And I didn't realize it till I actually stepped on that stage. Oh, I'm going to do this bit where I'm a warm up guy for no one. No one is in the crowd. So it was a great experience and I loved it, but it was a weird one because I was literally doing it for near zero people in a snowstorm in the middle of Montana. And I'm like, I'm so grateful. I'm so happy, but what the heck is this?
It was brilliant. It was brilliant. It was inspiring.
That means a lot. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you.
And, it's helping me. I'm trying to reprogram or I don't know, clear away the muck of whatever. And your message was more fulfilling life through humor. That's what it was. Was it more?
That's what it was.
Through humor. And you talk about when you walk into a room, you look for the humor.
Yes.
And like every opportunity is an opportunity to inject humor into a situation.
I think to a degree, yes. I think what you're talking about is definitely on the money, right? But I look at it more in terms of just always being present. Because I think a lot of the times, you go through life and, you get in your car, you turn it on, you drive somewhere. Hey, how you doing? Oh, I'm good. You might drive through somewhere and everything is so automatic. You know what I mean? I feel very rarely today are we present in a situation and really engaging someone without having a bunch of canned answers or just kind of like trying to get through it, looking back on the day and being like, oh, whatever, not even really remembering anything because we were never present and in it and seeing everything around us. And I think when you are present, it lends itself to having more humor and seeing the jokes in life and seeing the funny things in life. And I think whenever you're present and you can create a funny or create a bit or create a joke, that is giving someone sort of the perspective of like, whoever's trying to tell me a joke or whoever's trying to be funny, they're trying to make me laugh. And if they're trying to make me laugh, they care about me. Right. And they're trying to do something to make me happier. And that's kind of like the main message. Even if a joke fails, you're making someone happy.
That was a selling point. You just reminded me was, try it, even if you feel uncomfortable about it, because you're doing something good. You're trying to make somebody laugh. Maybe I'll be more brazen in the future because of that message. But, do it because somebody's going to see that, even if it falls flat. Try it, do it. Like I said, I grew up in a family of 6 and, humor was a very big part of everything. It still is. So we're always looking for the next punchline. We're always trying to be the one who makes the rest of them laugh.
Exactly.
And are you from a big family?
I am an only child. I'm from the opposite of that situation. But whether it's, being an only child or it's having, like a 12-person family and having everyone, all families have tension. It's tough growing up. And humor relieves that. And humor helps you get through it. And whatever kind of bull is in the way, whatever kind of anger or tension is in the way, a joke is so powerful and can kind of take away the evilness or the stress or the anxiety of a situation because it's a joke.
So I recommend to our listeners, definitely check out Erik's TED Talk. And you can find it on YouTube. You have a YouTube station, right?
It is. So I believe the TED Talk that I did was actually under the TEDx Talks for Yale College account. Okay. But also my own, where I post some stand-up, some fun stuff. But just look up Erik Escobar TED Talk. You'll see my beautiful face. I'm pretty sweaty. It's a good time.
It is. It's a good time, and it's a very good message. And it's going to, it's something that we're always going to look back on and be like, that was the day after lockdown. I interviewed your friend
Zach, right?
Zach Lyman.
Yeah.
And that's how it is with me. I connect with somebody and then I look at their world and who's in their world, and I landed on you. And, because you have a presence out there, there's a lot of breadcrumbs out there on the internet. One of the things he said that day is, oh, my friend, Erik Escobar, he just told me he's going to be on this show. What I realized is that my daughter had me watching The Masked Singer and my friend Kevin. They both watch it and they're like, oh, we've been watching this. So I watched it for about a season, quickly. And then I saw that there is this offshoot of that, and it's called Show me your voice.
Yep. I can see your voice. Yeah.
I can see your voice. Okay. I can see your voice. I get that mixed up. And what I realized is that the one episode of that I watched was you were in it.
No way.
Yes.
What are the odds? What are the odds?
I mean, I don't know how many episodes of that was. And I just loved it. You were so brilliant. And you just came out and you belted out that heart song like it was nobody's business. And you're not a singer.
I am not. I'm a comedian. I'm a TED talker, but I am not a singer. I'm a lot of things, but not that.
So then I was like, oh, I got to get this guy on my show. How did that happen?
So kind of like the TED Talk, what's insane is we were actually supposed to shoot my episode, I want to say March 24. COVID happened. So we put it on hiatus. We shot in, I want to say August. And then I think the show came out around November. Oh, we were actually Thanksgiving. We were the Thanksgiving episode, which was really exciting. Oh, that was a trip. It was a super trip. I actually got in because I want to say I was auditioning every year for America's Got Talent. I was always putting my stuff in. And there was a casting person there who was super great, super amazing. And she was like, well, you can go for AGT again, but there's this other thing that I think, you might be good for. Check out I Can See Your Voice. So I submitted my materials, sent in a video. They were like, hey, that's great. Can you sing worse? Sent another video where I sang worse. And they're like, be even badder. And I'm like, so I sent in these videos. I was progressively getting more and more horrible. Eventually they brought me in and it was an amazing experience. I would consider that like my first major kind of non-commercial TV thing. And I had such a fun time on that show. It was so wonderful. It's a tense show. It stresses you out. I don't know about you. When I watched this season, I was like, oh, who's it going to be? Are they bad? Are they good? It created a lot of anxiety in my body.
It's stressful.
It's very stressful.
So tell us the premise of the show.
So the premise of the show, of I Can See Your Voice, I believe I don't know if it started in the Philippines or in Thailand or Korea, but I know it got big in all those markets. And essentially, you have let's call it like a dais of about 6 singers, and some of them can sing, some of them can't sing. And the contestant, through all these little challenges, has to figure out whether they're a good singer or a bad singer, put their money on which one it is, and see if they're correct. But the crazy thing about it is like some of these good singers are purposely doing bad things during their lip sync, during their interviews, during their whisper, challenges. And some of these bad singers, they're pretty confident. They're pretty good liars. So you're basically having to put your money on these people where you've never heard their voices. They're going through all these challenges and you're putting like 10 grand a pop on like, I think they're good. I think they're bad. And when they're good, you celebrate. When they're bad, oh, I'm sorry.
I love it when they're bad because they're just so heartfelt about their bad singing. That's how I sing. I can relate to it.
I love it when they're bad too, only because like it's like going to karaoke. You know what I mean? When you go to karaoke, if someone picks their song and they're nervous, they're kind of, halving it. It's like, all right, this is good. But when you see someone who's dancing and rocking it and having a good time, they could be the worst singer ever. But if they're loving it, oh, I'm loving it too.
It's infectious. It's infectious. And so you were one of the actors who, I know you were wearing a security guard outfit and, or you worked in a jail or a prison or something. That was your thing, they said?
Yeah. So I actually, on the side, I actually teach improv and comedy workshops to kids who are incarcerated. Pre-pandemic, I was working a lot of detention camps, juvenile detention centers, a couple of schools that were very, very underserved in tough neighborhoods. And we kind of started doing a lot more Zoom instruction and Zoom workshops, but it's tough in the camps. It's very, very difficult. But when they were asking me like, well, for your character, what do you do? Who are you? Originally, I was supposed to be like this rocker guy because like we were talking about earlier, I love metal, I love rock, and they were going to do that. And then when we switched it up between March and August, because we were going to shoot in March, when August hit, I think they switched up some of the voices, some of the people. They gave someone else a rocker persona. So they were like, well, you can't be a rocker anymore. Who do you want to be? And I'm like, well, I do this for a job. And they're like, cool, let's make you musical bars. You're going to be the prison singer guy. And I'm like, cool, that's great. Sure. Yeah, I'll do it. Why not? Oh, this is a very aggressive looking costume, but okay, fine. You kind of just roll with it. Like, you want to do this? Yeah, sure. And then next thing you know, you're singing in front of Rick Springfield.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Rick Springfield. Oh, that's so fun. So these are all the breadcrumbs I'm following on the internet with you. And of course, there's your stand-up comedy, which is what you do. Comedy.
Yes.
Let's talk about your comedy. Let's talk about that.
I would love to. I'm such a comedy nerd. Let's talk about all of it.
When did you decide, oh, I'm a comic? Like, how did that come about?
My dad growing up used to always love telling jokes. He was a big joke guy. I remember we had some like VHSs of like Laurel and Hardy, Buster Keaton, like a lot of like, older comedy stuff. So comedy was kind of always in my life growing up. It was always kind of around. I feel like I love performing. Like in junior high, I started playing bass and guitar, and I wanted to be a musician. I think I really got a fun high out of performing for people and having a good time, whether it was music or theater, whatever it was. High school came around. I started doing football. I was on the JV football team. Typical California story. We had football practice. It started raining. They canceled football practice because LA people hate the rain. Football was canceled, and I was waiting maybe another hour and a half for my ride to pick me up. So while I was waiting, I actually stumbled upon my school's improv team, just kind of walking around campus.
Wow.
And I was like, this is really cool. So I started, jamming with them. We started doing some improv. The next day I quit football. I joined improv because I was like, this is really fun.
Wow.
And while I was on the improv team, I remember we had a coach who would come in like once a month, once every couple months. Amazing comic named Tom Clark. And I remember one time we were trying to schedule a workshop with Tom. Like, can you come in this date? It would be great to do a workshop. And he was like, oh, actually, I would love to do that date, but I'm on tour in South Africa at that time. Can we do another date? And just casually saying, I'm on tour in South Africa, I was like, that is so cool. That's just part of your life. You're just, let me jump on a plane, do a dozen shows in theaters in another country, come on back, teach these high school kids improv. And I remember being so like, wow, that is so cool that you do that as a comic. And you do that as a, a stand-up. So I ended up taking a class with him when I was in college. It was right around the time when I was about to graduate my undergrad. And I was kind of in a position where it's like, all right, I can start applying to jobs. I can get a job right now. Where do I want to work? Or I can, while I'm young, I can do this comedy thing. You know what I mean? Stay up late at night, do shows, go on the road for a little bit of money. Like, I think I'm at a point where it's like, if I'm going to do this, I'm going to do this now.
Yeah. And
I've never looked back. And it's been a great journey. I love my life. I love my career. It's tough. It's very tough. It's very annoying. There's a lot of politics. There's a lot of kind of BS in it. But, every year gets better and better, and I wouldn't trade it for the world. It's a dream. I love it.
So what was the driving force for you to do this? Was it the laughter? Zach said it was one of the things that he really likes is being able to engineer the joke and to refine it and to pull it off. Like that whole process, he loves that. I would have thought it was just the laughs because that's what I'm going for when I'm trying to make my siblings laugh. It's that feeling of, oh, I made them laugh. Like that's edifying to me. But the other part of it seems daunting. And I've watched you tell the same jokes in different video clips, and it's interesting. So is it the same for you, or is it the laughter, or both?
It's a bunch of things. I think one big thing for me is like, I don't know if you ever had like a job where you did a task, you did a project or whatever, and your boss like comes over and takes the time to be like, hey, I think you did a great job on this. Like, I'm giving you kudos because you did great. That feeling feels so good when you get that approval, from like a boss or a manager, whatever it is. And the way I look at comedy is the people in the audience, they're your boss. You know what I mean? Because you're working for them. Like, you're also working for the club, you're working for the booker, you're working for the producer. But that audience right then, they're your manager, they're your boss. And when you do a joke and it lands, they aren't even taking the time to be like, let me tell them you did a good bit. They're organically, instinctively just laughing. They're not even controlling their approval and their validation for you. And I think it's such a magical feeling when you can make people laugh because they're not even in control of their bodies. They just want to give you that approval to let you know you're doing great and we're connecting right now and we're community right now and it feels good. And that would say that's the number one thing. Like that feeling of making people laugh. it just feels so good. It feels so great.
Well, and it's a two-way street, isn't it? You're giving and they're receiving, and they're giving and you're receiving.
Yeah. And
it's actually profound and beautiful.
Well, and also let's make it a little less profound and beautiful. I also,
okay.
I think also, you know, comedy is fun because it is a gamble. Every night you go out, it's a gamble. Just like you go out, you play your numbers on roulette, put it on black, put it on red. You don't know how it's going to hit. You never know how a crowd is going to be. I've gotten a standing ovation at the 7 p.m. show, and I've gotten bottles thrown at me at the 9 p.m. show. You know what I mean? Like
for the same show,
the same 20 minutes, the same 40 minutes. And it's like, this killed an hour ago. That gambling aspect of it is a rush. You know what I mean? Because you never know what you're stepping into. And when you win, you win. When you lose, you lose. It sucks. Oh, it's super addictive. Super addictive.
So you just reminded me of one of my favorite scenes of a movie ever, Punchline.
Okay.
Have you ever seen it?
I don't think I've seen it. No.
Oh, dude, you got to see it.
I will.
With Tom Hanks and Sally Field, and they're doing the clubs. That's what it is. And Tom Hanks gets up, and his bit is funny, you know, whatever. And the next night or another night, he gets up and he does it. And his father, who is a doctor, who thinks he's going to medical school, is in the audience. And he gives the same bit. And he ends up sobbing inconsolably. It's the same. And it was just so profound because, I mean, that was specifically because his father was in the audience. And it shows you there's a fine line between humor and grief, I guess you could say. I think it was the 80s. I think it was a movie in the 80s. I
feel like it had to be. I'm familiar with it. I just haven't seen it yet.
Yeah. I think you would really appreciate it, especially after our conversation today. And so, you know, what is it that one time you give the same bit and it flies and it's great, and then what are some of the elements that maybe later it wasn't, like it didn't land the way that you wanted it to?
For a multitude of reasons, it can always kind of go well or go horribly, horribly wrong. Something that's really crazy about comedy is it doesn't matter really what your bits are like, what your jokes are like, what your writing's like, what your perspective is like, because that audience will get an opinion of you within the first 5 seconds of seeing you. You know what I mean? You hear about comics who don't wear patterns and you don't wear logos because you don't want to be distracting. A lot of comics say like beards hurt you because people just don't trust people with beards. If you're in a small town and they don't like Mexicans, they might hate me right off the bat. So there's so many factors where you just can't control it. You go in, you do your thing, and every audience is different. You know, you could have a very blue collar working crowd for one show, and the next show is nothing but like bachelorette parties. I can do the same set, but both parties are going to take it very different ways, and they're going to feel it in different ways. And that's kind of like the non-gambling aspect of comedy, in that there is a gamble for a lot of your jokes, but there is a certain level of skill of, instead of saying blue in that one joke, let me say pink and see if it works a little better. Or maybe for, you know, in Texas or whatever, maybe when I have this joke about food, I can talk about barbecue. But when I do it in Seattle, I'm talking about fish and chips. There are little elements of every joke that you can change and make a little better to kind of tailor it to that crowd specifically. I do a bit in particular where I always ask the bartender, the server, like, give me some names of some towns out here I can make fun of. Because they're the same jokes, but it's different towns every time you perform it on the road. So I think that's the big thing of like, why do some jokes work in front of other crowds and don't work in front of these crowds? Because every crowd is different, and you as the comic just have to like tailor and tweak things to make sure every crowd is having the best experience possible for them, because they're all unique.
Yeah. Oh, that's fascinating. Like I noticed from I watched Zach and I watched your videos, and one of the things that I realized is you're really doing the same story refined, but you're doing it in such a way that it seems like it's off the cuff, but that's a very practiced thing. I guess I never thought about that before.
Well, when you look at like I'll put it this way, if I'm doing an hour for a club or whatever it is like that, that hour is going to be a lot of my jokes, like a lot of chunks. So you have your joke, and then if you have a couple of jokes on the same topic, you have your bit, and then you have a couple bits on the kind of the same general thing. That's a chunk. And then a couple of chunks make your big set. So if I have a chunk about online dating and I have, let's call it a dozen jokes in there, I'm going to do those dozen jokes for my hour. But if I'm doing a 10-minute set or a 5-minute set, out of those dozen jokes, I might only do the best two. You know what I mean? Or I might only do the best one. So it's crazy because as you're doing these shows, you're doing like different forms of the joke. And then you're like doing different forms of like the meat of it. Like how much fat are you cutting off? Are you going into a little more things? And then even bigger than that, I intro a lot of my jokes with crowd work. So it's like, who's dating? You're a couple. How long have you been together? Get some magic there. Talk about my girlfriend. Do my girlfriend joke. Do my partner joke. Do my stuff. And it's crazy because you have these like, jokes are almost like these living beings, but depending on the set, you're either going to do the full thing, half the thing, intro it with crowd work, do a tag, do a callback from a different thing. And it's crazy because they're the same jokes, but the way you manipulate them every set is, I think it's very exciting and to see like where it goes.
How would you describe your humor?
When I was probably about 21, 22, really getting into comedy, I was really into Anthony Jeselnik. And I think I loved Anthony Jeselnik so much for a couple of reasons. One, I've always had crazy ADD and it's hard for me to focus on things. And I think because of that, I'm very, very attracted to short jokes. Like if you have a 10-minute story, I'll like it, but it takes a lot of work for me to really stay engaged. If you got a 20-second joke, boom, I love it. And Anthony had very solid jokes as jokes, but he was also this kind of very like dark, menacing, evil kind of guy. And I think when I was younger, as just, like a dude in his early 20s, I was like, yeah, I like that. I like that darkness. I like that scariness to things. And my perspective right now, my point of view when I go on stage, I'm very silly. I'm very unassuming. I'm very wacky. I'm not like super serious. I'm a jokey joke guy. I like having that wacky, silly persona, but I think I still take with me that darkness that I was so attracted to, that Anthony Jeselnik kind of like ingrained in my life when I was listening to him so much when I was a kid or in my early 20s, that I've now had like this mix of like, I'll get a little mean, I'll get a little evil, I'll get a little dark, but it's all done through like this silly, fun perspective to where as dark as it gets, we're still going to be okay. And I might have some like mean joke about something, but in the end, it turns out to be like a joke about fruit or, you know what I mean? Disneyland. Like I like going to those dark places, but keeping it light as much as I can to counteract that balance. Yeah, and that's like where I really live. Yeah.
You drop these little dark bombs. I'm thinking about the one where you're talking about living with and one you were living with your mother, was your roommate. The other was your parents, and you're smoking, and then your mom gets all upset and you're like, it's only crack. And it's like, and then you go on, but you don't stop there. You just keep going. And it's like, I like that.
It's fun because like I said earlier, every audience is different and I'm always going to be me.
What are you doing now and how has COVID affected your profession and how you conduct yourself in it?
So we got hit very, very hard. Every performing artist, especially comics, it's kind of a scary time. Last year, I was actually on the road about February to about May. I was on the road for about 5 months, and then March hit, and then I was like, oh, well, I guess half of my shows are canceled. And this is like work that you're banking on to pay your rent. You know what I mean? This isn't like, oh, well, whatever. It's just like, well, some comedy. It's like, no, like I had a college that was supposed to pay for this month. I had this thing over here. So it was a little heartbreaking. It was a little scary. I firmly believe comedians, we are the hustlers and thugs of the arts world. All right. Like we're always trying to get any little gig. It's like, can I make $50 here? Yeah, let's do that. Do I have to drive 8 hours for $100? You know what? Let's go there. Like we're crafty. You know what I mean? We try to get every gig we can. And because of that, when the pandemic hit, we couldn't go anywhere. All these Zoom shows started popping up and all these virtual shows started popping up. And I would say from about March when the lockdown hit, to even today, looking at close to a year later, I was doing a bunch of Zoom shows and they would range from, just a couple comics in a Zoom meeting trying to dose each other to like actual like corporate gigs and, a couple holiday parties and colleges who would want to bring you in to do 30 minutes of comedy and they'd pay you. And it was scary in the beginning because I was like, I don't know what I'm going to do for work. I don't know what income I'm bringing in. But eventually this virtual thing started being a little more profitable. Not as profitable as it was pre-COVID, but like gigs were coming through, which was very, very exciting. We just had to look for them and chase them. When things started getting a little bit better, I actually started going on the road, I would say last September-ish. So in September, I did the East Coast, I did Ohio, Pennsylvania, Maryland, all outdoor shows. Very fascinating because I feel like a lot of the audience members were almost more like, wow, things are open and I can order a beer and I can sit in the theater and I can look at these people over here. They were more excited about that than it was to watch a comedy show, which I thought was fascinating because, you know, it's like, yeah, it is interesting to be around people. And some shows would be indoors, some shows would be outdoors. It depended on where you were. And it was really just kind of like trying to stay safe throughout all that, putting on your mask, wearing your gloves. I've also done some other shows kind of on the West Coast. I just did Las Vegas, just did Arizona, just did Oregon.
Well, you've pivoted. You've pivoted into the needs in the market. And
Yeah.
I commend you for that. I think that's really difficult to do for some people. And so that plus what you were saying, if there's anything we've learned in the past year is that we can't count on nothing.
Yeah.
And so we just really got to fly by the seat of our pants, assess the situation, and then make the best choice to move forward. And, you know, hopefully we won't always have that, you know, hesitancy, but right now it's out of necessity
100%.
to know that. Is there anything about COVID that's funny?
I feel like I've written a lot more COVID material just because I was like stuck in my house for like 6 months. And that was all I was thinking about and all I was putting on the paper. Obviously, you know, the infections aren't super hilarious. The deaths aren't hilarious.
That's not what I mean, yeah.
But I think there's something about any time, I'll put it this way. So look at 15 years ago. We didn't really have the internet as much as we had now. There wasn't really social media like there was, or like there is now. And I think we were living in a place where everyone would watch the same TV show. Everyone would watch the big movies that were coming out. Everyone experienced kind of the same experiences to some degree. So everyone was kind of on the same page. Like if you went to work on Monday or Tuesday, I would say 75% of the people in there, they all watched Jay Leno the night before, Letterman the night before, and you could talk about it and be like, did you see that thing on TV? Did you see whatever? Over the years, we've lost a lot of that sameness because there's a million shows. There's a million streaming platforms. Even every once in a while, when people are like, have you seen The Mandalorian? Have you seen Game of Thrones? It's not everyone. It's just a few people. So everyone's into what they're into right now, and it's different from everyone else. And I think that's fine. I think COVID really brought us all together.
In that way, you're absolutely right.
It's wild. We're all going through the same horrible experiences. We're all trying to, you know, do the best we can. We're all making sacrifices. We're all not doing things together. And I think COVID, if we're really trying to be glass half full, COVID is hilarious in that this horrible thing hit us and it made us all one again.
It made me watch what was it, The Tiger King?
Yeah, everyone was all about the Tiger King for a minute. Yeah,
I would have never watched that, but I watched it and I felt like that was another collective experience because everybody was watching it at the same time and talking about it.
Of course, yeah, and it's fun when those things happen. I would say some of the thing that I miss most about pre-COVID life is I'm a big wrestling fan. And I didn't realize until they started doing like screens and no audience that like half the fun of being a wrestling fan is watching how excited people get in the audience and seeing them chant at the same time and boo for the heels and cheer for all of their wonderful favorite wrestlers. And that's kind of happening in a weird way in the virtual world now because we're all like talking more. We're all like kind of on the same page. Like, oh, we hate this. We love this. And it's just a very interesting time to see community morphed into the virtual age.
That's a very good point.
Yeah.
That is a very good point. What do we see in the future for Erik Escobar?
Well, I'm constantly hustling, trying to get more road dates. In February, I'm working Vegas and Arizona again. In March, I'm working some shows in Florida. In April, May, I think I have some St. George stuff in Utah. So, COVID has not stopped me. I am trying to be safe, trying to, make sure everyone's good, do the safe shows. But I'm still getting out doing shows. You can check me out on Instagram at Erik Escobar to catch me up on any new things I'm doing there. And then I'm also still auditioning. I'm still going out for some fun stuff. Just hoping, life takes me in a fun, exciting, safe, financially profitable direction in the coming years.
Well, I've really enjoyed talking to you. I've learned a lot, which is
Likewise.
what I always get out of this.
I appreciate you. I appreciate the time. And I'll talk to you later.
Ditto.
Awesome. You take care.
There you have it. Erik Escobar, stand-up comedian, actor, and TED Talk speaker. To find out more about Erik, be sure to check out our episode notes. Thanks for listening. Have a great week.